Poetry is not luxury, writes Meena Kandasamy. It is a weapon. In a society of deeply entrenched hierarchies, words cannot afford to be passive. They must perform active, often aggressive, political work. In modern Indian literature, poets take traditional aesthetic forms and re-engineer them. They turn meter, metaphor, and myth into mechanical devices designed to dismantle socio-cultural constraints from the inside out. This approach is a necessity. The post-independent Indian identity is a dense knot of historical trauma and modern ambition. A seamless, straightforward narrative cannot accurately capture a fractured reality. To speak truthfully about this condition requires modes of writing that are themselves contradictory and fragmented. We observe this resistance across 5 socio-cultural battlegrounds: caste violence, patriarchal constraints, the ghost of colonialism, diasporic displacement, and material greed. To understand this mechanism, we will look at how Praveen Gadhvi, Meena Kandasamy, Kamla Das, Nissim Ezekiel, and Rachna Joshi deploy their craft. By forensically deconstructing their work, we see exactly how laughter, confession, satire, and paradox function as engineered political tools. To understand how laughter functions politically, we start with the French philosopher Henri Bergson and his analytical framework for the comic. Bergson argued that human life is inherently fluid and flexible. Laughter is triggered when that fluid behavior devolves into something automatic and mechanical. When humans become obsessed with greed or blind ambition, they begin to act like rigid machines, and that rigidity provokes a comic response. This reaction requires emotional detachment. We cannot laugh if we empathize too deeply with the subject. In Bergson's model, laughter acts as an intellectual, social corrective, a mechanism designed to mock selfishness and nudge society back toward a flexible balance. We see this exact machinery at work in Praveen Gadhvi's poem Laughing Buddha. Here, the Buddha's laughter is entirely stripped of frivolous amusement. It is a calculated, philosophical act. Applying Bergson's framework, the Buddha's laughter targets the mechanical seriousness of worldly life. He is looking at the absurdity of human ambition, the rigid, repetitive chase for wealth and status, and reacting to the contradiction of clinging to impermanent things. Gadhvi engineers this laughter into a tool of intellectual liberation. It is deployed to snap the observer out of their material obsessions and force a return to spiritual detachment. In the ancient Mahabharata, the young archer Ekalavya is denied formal training by the royal teacher Dronacharya due to his lower caste. When Ekalavya achieves mastery on his own, threatening the privileged prince Arjuna, Dronacharya demands Ekalavya's right thumb as a tribute, permanently crippling his ability. The poet Meena Kandasamy strips away the mythological distance of this story. She explicitly asserts that Ekalavya is the archetype of the modern, hyper-talented Dalit student. In her poem Ecliven, the romanticized veneer of ancient sacrifice is entirely removed. The text focuses on the core mechanism of the myth, the structural violence and systemic exclusion of marginalized communities who excel despite denied resources. In this modern translation, the demanded Guru Dakshina, the severed thumb, is a metaphor for the crushing of dreams and the forced compromises extracted by modern educational institutions. The voice of the poem operates on 2 frequencies simultaneously. It is a deep lament for lost potential, but it is also a defiant reclamation of Dalit resilience, refusing to let the violence remain hidden behind sacred tradition. Rewriting myth becomes a strategic weapon. Kandasamy exposes how ancient caste hierarchies did not disappear, they simply mutated into the gatekeeping structures of modern academia. Confessional poetry emerged as a deliberate blurring of the private life and the public text. It utilizes taboo subjects and raw autobiographical honesty to expose truths that polite society prefers to keep hidden. Kamla Das adopts this style in her seminal poem in Introduction, turning her own fragmented identity into a text of resistance. Das writes, "I am sinner, I am saint, I am the beloved and the betrayed." By claiming these absolute contradictions, she refuses to be confined to a single role, shattering the binary definitions imposed on womanhood by a patriarchal culture. She extends this resistance to her cultural environment, stating, "I speak 3 languages, write in 2, dream in 1." This linguistic multiplicity is a direct refusal to conform to a homogenized, easily digestible national identity. Here we see the mechanical brilliance of the confessional form. Das dives so deeply into her own hyper-specific, fragmented experiences that her extreme vulnerability translates into a universalized voice for female subjectivity. She weaponizes the pronoun I, transforming the intensely personal into an aggressive, calculated dismantling of gender and cultural constraints. Following independence, India inherited a fractured linguistic legacy. The English language was both a tool of colonial oppression and a primary medium for modern self-expression. Nissim Ezekiel tackles this tension in his poem The Patriot, writing entirely in Indian English to intentionally exaggerate awkward phrasing. This grammatical friction is a highly specific structural choice. Consider the speaker's declaration, "I am standing for peace and non-violence." The comic misuse of the present continuous tense immediately alerts the reader to a disruption. A sharp tension emerges between the high-minded moral ideals the speaker is trying to communicate and the broken, inherited language they are forced to use to express them. The resulting tone is one of absurd optimism. The speaker is sincerely hopeful for progress, yet trapped by a language that undermines their own credibility. Ezekiel weaponizes this grammatical friction. By forcing the reader to navigate this hybrid, awkward idiom, he proves that a fractured syntax is actually the most accurate reflection of a fractured, newly independent national consciousness. When human experience defies logic, writers rely on paradox, forcing two seemingly opposing ideas together to articulate a deeper truth that cannot be expressed any other way. Rachna Joshi anchors her poem Leaving India on a central paradox. I left India, but India never left me. The act of migration creates distance, but Joshi suggests that moving physically away from the homeland actually intensifies the psychological intimacy of memory. The absence heightens the cultural presence. This duality defines the migrant identity. To belong to the diaspora is to live simultaneously in two worlds, to be rooted in an emotional homeland while physically uprooted in a new one. Paradox, therefore, is the only accurate language for migration. It takes the pain of physical displacement and transforms it into the ongoing reality of a complex dual identity. The socio-cultural fabric of India is simply too layered to be captured by a straight traditional narrative. The lived realities of its people require a far more sophisticated machinery of expression. It requires philosophical detachment to combat mechanical greed. It requires the revision of ancient myth to expose systemic caste exclusion. It requires raw confessionalism to break patriarchal binaries, deliberate satire to process a colonial past, and literary paradox to survive the geographic fracture of the diaspora. Indian poetry proves that these aesthetic forms function as an engineered vocabulary of resistance, the precise tools a complex society requires to forge its own identity.